Hey folks, welcome back to my channel. I'm just realizing that this is part 2 in a series and I filmed part 1 and you guys probably will have already seen it, and I forgot to mention that it was part 1 in any sort of a series, but the series theme is inspiration. So last week we talked about inspiration and kind of moving from the interest phase of inspiration to the motivation phase of inspiration, and this week we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about scenarios that can come up in commercial illustration. And this one came, this is actually a question that's come from a number of people, and that is what happens when you're painting something for a client, drawing something for a client, and you don't feel inspired by what you're drawing. So if you're interested in that, if you want to work in commercial illustration, or really if you want to work with any client, even if it's not commercial, even if you just want to do private commissions, then stick around and we're going to dive into it. All right, so we'll start by saying that this scenario will definitely happen at some point. If you decide to work as a professional artist, professional illustrator, at some point you will be asked to paint something that doesn't particularly excite you, something that you don't really like, that you're not that interested in, and you will have the opportunity to turn down the client, to not take on the project, especially maybe if you are more in the fine art space. It may be something that you just, you're able to turn down and not take on. But I personally regularly say yes to drawing things that I haven't necessarily felt inspired to draw. I draw the line, no pun intended, I draw the line. I will refuse a project if it sits wrong ethically, like if it asks me to cross a line ethically or morally that I'm not comfortable with. I have turned down those kinds of projects, but if it's like, here, draw this food item or this scene or whatever, and I'm like, oh, that's not something I would ever draw on my own, I do those kinds of projects all the time. And it's very challenging, but it can be done, and we're going to talk about that in this video. I want to mention one other thing first. If you have a really good, solid portfolio that clearly shows your work and the range of work that you typically do, the subjects that you typically work in, your style, if you have a really kind of comprehensive portfolio, this will happen less often. This is something that happens a lot in the beginning, I feel like, because your style isn't quite fully expressed. And it does still happen to me even now, even though I have a really pretty big portfolio. But yes, having that portfolio is a little bit of a guard against it, but it's not going to ever completely stop it from happening. It's kind of inevitable that at some point, or at regular intervals, if you're anything like me, you will be asked to draw things that you're not really that interested in. So like everything I share on this channel, this is from my experience. So if you have a different personality type or different perspective, this may not necessarily work for you. But what I have found to be really helpful in drawing and painting things that aren't naturally interesting to me is to tap into inspiration that comes from something other than the subject itself. So this could be a bunch of different things. It could be like a really small detail in the subject, especially if it's a nice reference photo that the client is asking you to use. Maybe it's the lighting, something about the color, the combinations of color, the textures that are there in the subject, really those kind of small details that can draw you in. And if you're like me, if you're somebody who likes details, that can be really inspiring. It could also be, this has helped in a number of situations for me. It could be a sense of empathy for the client. So whenever I start working with a client, I do really try to get to know them a little bit and kind of understand what their goals are and where they're coming from and the problem that they're trying to solve. So sometimes just my connection and empathy for the client is enough to get me inspired and, it's enough to get me motivated to draw and paint that subject. And the third thing, this is probably the most powerful motivation for me, is just being in love with the process itself. So just really enjoying drawing and painting so much that you will really apply that to anything, even if it's not something that you naturally would be pulled towards yourself. Now, these 3 tactics, that last one especially, can be very difficult to do when you're at the beginning of your art career. It can feel almost impossible actually to move the thing that inspires you or to draw your fuel from something else than the subject itself. But it really does get easier over time, especially as you build up your creative muscles to be able to tackle that problem in an effective way. This is why I talk so often about the importance of really chasing your inspiration and chasing those things that interest you and excite you when you're early on in your creative journey, because being able to draw something that doesn't particularly excite or interest you is kind of like being at the gym and lifting really heavy weights. So you can't just like walk right in there and go try and deadlift a 200-pound dumbbell or barbell. This shows how much I have done some weightlifting, but I'm not up on all the terms. But I do know that you can't just walk in there and try to lift 200 pounds of weight without having worked up to that. So you have to start with the lighter weights and chasing your own inspiration, the things that really light you up, the things that you're really interested in, chasing those earlier on. That's the lighter weight. That's the stuff that's going to get you in the door and build up your strength so that you can lift the heavier things later on. So you can get to that phase. You can get to that strength by doing what we just said, lifting those light weights initially. So start out taking those little tiny incremental baby steps in the areas that feel interesting and easy and welcoming and accessible, like you can just get pulled into them and almost like they pull you along without as much effort, that doesn't feel fraught. So I've talked about this quite a bit too. If you are feeling like you're really, really struggling or pushing yourself to do a particular thing and you're just like not making any headway and you can't feel motivated, not that you'll never go back to that, but it can be really good to take a step back from that and try something that feels easy. Try to find an easier way in. So yeah, that's gonna allow you, of course, to hopefully enjoy yourself while you're making the art, make it a more positive process, but then also gradually build up the strength that you need to maybe try that harder way in. So step one, lifting those weights. Step two is getting so comfortable with the movement, so the actual movement of lifting the weight, that you feel really confident in it. It becomes almost like muscle memory, something you could do in your sleep. And this for me taps into that thing that I mentioned earlier, just actually a full-on adoration and love of the process itself, where you're so enamored by drawing and painting that you are just willing to do really whatever so that you can have more time drawing and painting. And then step three is to do it again. So once you're feeling like, yes, this thing I tackled is easy, I can do this in my sleep, I'm really comfortable with these movements, then that's when you level up on your weight and you try something that's a little bit harder and a little bit trickier and maybe doesn't come quite as naturally to you. So if you are still a beginning illustrator, if you're in this first part of your career, or maybe if you are an established illustrator and you're launching out in a new direction, trying a different process, a different subject matter, a different media, whatever, don't go right for those 200-pound weights. Stick in the corner with the little tiny, the 1 pound, 3 pound dumbbells. That's sometimes where I end up. Stick in that corner for a while until you can get really comfortable with the moves. Then start gradually upping your weight, like we talked about, maybe by trying a subject that you are not as naturally interested in. Don't necessarily dive right off the deep end, but pick something that would feel a little bit more challenging or not pull you in quite as naturally as what you gravitated towards initially. And then see if you can find a way in, like we talked about. So whether it's through those small details, the texture, the color, the empathy for the client, or maybe just if it's an imaginary project that you're assigning to yourself, empathy for the person who would care about that, who would want to draw and paint that thing. And then of course, my favorite one, just the process itself. If you have gotten so comfortable with those movements that they just kind of almost pull you in all on their own, then that may mean that you're ready to level up once again. And if you're in that situation, if you're trying to lift that 200-pound weight and you find that you just can't, that's okay. Just go back a few steps. Go back and try lifting 180 or 185, whatever it is. Try something that is maybe a little bit closer to where you were. Maybe you tried to take a full step and you need to just take a half step. Always remember that even if that is frustrating, well, it's definitely frustrating. So even though that is frustrating, you will be able to do it at some point. If you can't do it right now, that doesn't mean that you're bad or that you're not a good artist or that you shouldn't work in illustration or that you can't work with clients. It doesn't mean any of those things. It just means that you can't do that right now. So go back and try something, still challenge yourself, still keep pushing yourself, still keep moving, putting one foot in front of the other, but maybe pick something that's a little bit of an easier target, lower hanging fruit, lower rung on the ladder. I am using all of the mixed metaphors today. But yes, take a little step back and by all means, keep moving. Don't use this as an excuse to stop moving or to stop trying altogether. Okay, so I hope this was a helpful video. I hope you all enjoyed seeing it. I'm filming with natural light again today, so We are just flooded in here. I hope this isn't too overexposed. Yes, thank you for watching. Thank you to my patrons for supporting this channel. Thank you to Meg for editing. I hope everybody who's watching is having a great week, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye.